Sixth graders, some people asked for some help on the check-in today, so I'm just going to go through it kind of quick and show you where to look in the slides. Number 1, explain the Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal and its effect on history. So as you look at this slide, it was an agreement as the Age of Exploration began between the countries of Spain and Portugal. It divided this new world using the longitude line 50 degrees west, and you can see the map down below if you look here. Spain is going to get, according to this agreement, this, and Portugal gets this, but they also had some colonies in Africa. So what the result is that Brazil today was it was a Portuguese colony, so it speaks Portuguese today, whereas the rest, all the Spanish colonies that become independent countries, speak Spanish. So the difference is in the language and how the cultures developed in those different countries. So Brazil is a little different than all the other countries because of the Treaty of Tordesillas. So you're just giving a couple sentences to explain that. The next one is explain encomiendas and how the power worked in the Spanish colonies. So when you're going through these slides, and we continue on, you've watched those videos. This is the slide for the colonization for the Spanish colonies. They were really strict. They didn't want people other than people from Spain coming to their colonies because they wanted to protect the gold. It was all about collecting the gold and sending it back to the king to get wealthy. So people that came from Spain had the most power. They were the landowners, or parents directly from Spain if you were born in the New World. Spain gives encomiendas, which are laws, rights, to demand taxes and labor from the natives. What it did was made the slavery legal. So they could enslave the natives and stay on their land. So they could take whatever land from the natives once they had been conquered. Spain has about 300 years of ruling those colonies using this encomiendos. And then the next slide showed you how they set it up. So peninsulares are what they had, this class system that gives certain people certain rights. It was not fair. It was not fair at all. The people born in Spain had the most rights at the top of the pyramid, and each level gets a little bit less rights until you get to slaves. The enslaved people were the native, and eventually, because the natives died off from smallpox that the Europeans didn't know they were carrying, then they imported people from Africa to be the slaves to serve in their colonies, to work the farms, plantations. Haciendas were what their plantations were called, big farms, in the mines to mine the gold. That's what they used. So a few sentences, 4 or 5 sentences to explain that. Next, you're going to go to the slides on independence, how Mexico won its independence from Spain. And there's a really good, a few slides here from some textbook pages. Read them carefully. And it's going to talk about the Criollo priest, Miguel Hidalgo. And he was in a town of Dolores. And his cry to bring people together to war, to protest, is called the Cry of Dolores, but he rang the church bells. Church bells were one of the loudest and ways to call people together in this time because they didn't have phones. They didn't have another way to call people yet in the early 1800s. So they would use the church bells, and whenever anybody heard those ringing continuously, other than the normal rings they might do on a Sunday, they knew to come and gather to see what was going on. So the Cry of Dolores, he gathered almost 80,000 people, a lot of the natives and mestizos who don't have many rights because of that class system, and he gets them to start fighting. So he's kind of like the George Washington of Mexico. But unfortunately, the Spanish catch him, and what he's doing is illegal. It's treason against the country of Spain. So he's executed by firing squad. And the next slide will talk about the man Iturbide, who had been joining the fight, continues to be the leader, steps up as the leader. And it takes almost 10 years of fighting Spain because Mexico doesn't have the resources or the soldiers trained, and a lot of the Native Americans had died, and a lot of people are loyal to Spain. The peninsulares that have all the land don't want Mexico to become an independent country. So it takes about 10 years, and they win their independence in September of 1821. The next question is going to be about the Columbian Exchange. So when you go down the slides, it's going to talk about Simón Bolívar and the independence. It was just before the independence. The Columbian Exchange began when Columbus's ships first came. They began to bring goods. They traded with the natives. They began to bring goods back to the New World, to England, to Europe. in Spain. And so things like tomatoes from the New World that had never been in Europe before are going to be introduced. Chocolate was a big one. They took from Mexico to Spain. Also, when Columbus came, they brought horses. Sometimes, as more and more Spanish ships come, those horses and other animals that they brought for farming would escape and get into our environment. So the Columbian Exchange is this big exchange of products going back and forth. It was animals, it was diseases. They brought smallpox that North American and South American had never seen and didn't have any immunities, very similar to kind of what we're going through now. But they didn't have the science that we have to know how to make a medicine or how to make a vaccine for that. So they were in a different situation, even scarier. Even this is pretty scary. But so just the exchange, the Columbian Exchange was that exchange back and forth. And then the final question on the check-in, so a couple sentences about that, is how South America won its independence. And that's where you read about Simón Bolívar. So when you go to the last slide, Simón Bolívar becomes the leader. He's from Venezuela. He'd actually gone to school in Spain. He played the prince who becomes King Ferdinand when they're both adults, and the king of Spain, and he had beat him, which you weren't allowed to do at that time. You weren't supposed to beat the royalty. You could be put in jail. They had absolute power, remember. So he was a brave soul to begin with, and he didn't agree with how the Spanish colonies treated the people, how there was that class system and it wasn't fair and it wasn't equal. So that made him want to be a revolutionary leader. And he begins, and then San Martin from Argentina joins in from the south, because South America is so big. If you can imagine all of South America, it's huge, trying to join in to fight and to drive the Spanish soldiers out of there. And when they meet kind of in the middle in Peru, they are able, with then Bolivar and San Martin, are able to drive the Spanish out of and win their independence for many of those countries. And you can look at that slide that has the map to see which countries became independent. Remember, it doesn't include Brazil, because Brazil was Portugal and it has a different story. All right, that should help you with the check-in today. Have a great day.